Hello, welcome back to another video. Today we'll be discussing the 1924 election, with the twist of it all being decided by you guys. About a week ago, I put up a Google Forms site and you guys voted through every election of the past 100 years, and now it is time to put it all together. I'm going to not only share the results, but also the electoral map. I've used math to find out how your voting results have swayed the different states, the swing states, the safe states. I did all 50. And this is the first one we're doing. This is an exciting one, actually. 1924 is a great year for Coolidge. The economy is booming, and he is generally liked by the populace, which seems right considering he's only been in office a year after Warren G. Harding, his predecessor's death. The problem for him, though, is mainly Harding's corruption scandals and those following him into his presidency. Now, the Democratic Party at the time wasn't having the best of luck either. It was being split on the dividing line, north and south. The conservative southern factions and the northern urban progressives. It would definitely be hard for the Democratic nominee to appeal to people outside his base. Now, there's a wild card, and that is Robert La Follette, who has formed the Progressive Party just this year, pushing for stronger government, labor rights, and anti-monopoly policy. Workers and farmers are naturally drawn to this, but he does lack national appeal. So that's the backstory behind the election of 1924, but this election is going to be quite different. You guys have taken part in it 100 years later, with some change, and your mindsets are obviously quite different. A lot of my audience is European, so they have that European mindset, so I am curious to see how our progressive candidate does, our third party, so to speak, and I'm going to run it through. I'm going to first go through safe states on this map here, and then I'm going to go for our likely states, our lean states, and our tilt states if we have any. And as we go, I will show the votes, show the percentages, I will show the math that went into it. But yeah, this is my map. We have our states here with the electoral votes of the time. Sorry Hawaii, sorry Alaska, not yet. And then I have Coolidge right here. This is the Republican candidate. And then I have John W. Davis right here. He's a Democratic candidate. I did not have room for the progressive, but I have put places for smaller parties right here. This is where you'll see their votes. Green means progressive. This is right here. And so are the colors right here. Boom, boom, boom. Libertarian, independent. And then I have my little color selection thing. This is the colors for safe states. This is the color for likely states. This is the color for lean states. And this is the color for tilt states. And just to be clear, safe state is anything above 15 points. So for example, any state that has more than a 15% difference in Republican support versus Democrat support, or the opposite, or vice versa, that will be classified as a safe state. Now, anything between 15 and 5, that's a likely state. It is, generally a sign that a state might be vulnerable, but really it's going to go for its party. Less than 5 would be a lean state, which means it was quite a close race. We saw this just in 2024 with a lot of states. Kamala Harris lost a lot of ground in certain states that before would have been probably likely, but now, or at least in 2024, where it became lean, which is very interesting. And tilt is for those cases where it's decided by a point or less. Think of Wisconsin in the last election. Think of Florida in 2000. I believe that difference was like 500 votes. Very small percentages will be shown as tilt. Alright, so here we have the official map. I made this myself, but this is the official map of 1924. This is what actually happened in reality. As you can see, there is a little bit of green on the map, which for America is pretty cool, especially 1900s America, the state of Wisconsin. And as you can see, it's a dark green as well. It wasn't just a slight victory. It was a massive victory in Wisconsin, but still 13 votes is 13 votes. As you can also see, there is quite a big difference between the Democrats' integrity and the Republicans' integrity. The Democrats are not really fighting too much here. They are pretty solid everywhere. And actually the most solid state right here is South Carolina. I believe had 98% vote for the Democratic Party, which nowadays is unbelievable. But you can see a lot more states here are less dark. A lot more states are more likely to crack. And there's two reasons for that. The first reason is the progressive candidate. All of these states that are not as dark here are being affected by him. These are states that he almost won in, notably North Dakota, which is also surprising, especially nowadays. He almost won in. And other states like this, Nevada, he got very close in. So I'll be curious to see how that changes as we do our election based on the poll results that you guys put in. But these are where we're fighting here, and these states are being fought with the Democrats. Places like Kentucky, places like Maryland, places like West Virginia. These are places that are being fought over quite intensely. Now there are weak points in the Democratic Party. There is the weak point of Tennessee. There is the point of now Oklahoma is a weak point because just last cycle in 1920 it was a Republican grab. The same is true for Tennessee. There was this weird hole in what we know as the South. What's also interesting is that Kentucky was actually a Democratic grab in 1920. So you were looking at Kentucky being a part of the Democratic bloc, but Tennessee not. This small little sliver connected to the rest of it just through this state right here. It was a very interesting map, but that means that both of these states are very contentious, along with Oklahoma, and anything really could happen there. Now, just to help you visualize this, I have made a 1920 election map. So this is 1924, and this is 1920. And as you can see, Kentucky was a tilt state, which means less than one or less percentage points that made it go to the Democrats, which is really crazy. And then you have red Tennessee as well, very slightly. But one thing I'm noticing is just how much more solid they are in the West. You can see in 1924, the East held quite well, but the West just got destroyed by the progressive. And I mean, it's quite impressive. You can still see the Democrat influence right here. This didn't really go away. But just this staying from solid to this is really quite impressive on behalf of the progressive candidate. In the 1924 election, as you can see, they took these back and became more solid. But you just cannot ignore this massive mandate right here. 382 electoral votes. This eastern section really just does a number on anyone trying to, especially out here, anyone over here as well. It was very hard to defeat that. And the Democrats came in at 136 votes. Now, the popular vote share is 16.6%, 54%, and 29%. Now, this is a number that is kind of confusing and doesn't always tell you who's going to win. But that is what it is for this election. But like I said, you can see a lot of strength over here, a lot of strength over here, and weak points over here, caused by the progressives and also caused by the Democrats. So the Republican Party is definitely going to be the one under attack here. But it all depends on what you guys voted on, what you guys decided on. So let's check it out. So here I just took a screenshot of the poll results. I am not going to go to the site because I don't want you to get spoiled on the other ones. But as you can see, just this has to be Europeans. I don't know. But Robert almost beat out the Republican candidate in popular support. It looks like a lot of that support came from the Democrats. You can see the Democrats are only at 18.9% when they had 29%, so they lost a whole 10%. But also a lot of that came from the Republicans. As you can see, this is 41% for the Republican candidate here, while he had 54% of the actual vote here. So it seems pretty likely that this could really go either way. I know you see this and you think that there's a very high chance that the progressive could win, but like I said before, popular vote does not always equal electoral vote victory. I believe you had to get 266 electoral votes. You have to get 266 electoral votes to win this. And as you can see here, there's a lot jumbled right here, there's a lot right here, and there are certain clusters that matter more. Now, there are areas here that are overrepresented, that's for sure, but think about what the popular vote means. Popular vote, you could have a high popular vote. 16.6% is nothing to laugh at. And there are a lot of states here where he got very close to winning. A lot of people voted for him. But in the United States, getting close does not equal winning. So you could be 1% away and you will get nothing from it. You'll get nothing. So popular vote may be deceiving. We'll have to see how the actual states work out. And how I've set that up is I've recorded the popular vote down, the national popular vote, 54% for the Republicans, 29% for the Democrats, and 17% for the progressives. And I have put that up against the results of the poll, which of course are much different. You have 40% for the progressives, which is a huge uptick, only 19% for the Democrats and 41% for the Republicans. And then I go into each state. So, for example, let's go to Texas. As you can see in Texas, it was quite a strong Democratic victory. This is Deep South, after all. Well, you could argue about that, but as you can see, here are the vote results. There's 74% right there, and this is 20% for the Republicans and only 7% for the progressives. And so what I've done is I've compared these percentages to the national average. And as you can see, it's above in some aspects and below in some other aspects. And so I've written that down here. So Dems got 74%, Reps 20%, 7%, and this is that compared to the national average. So you can see in Texas, the Democrats outperformed by 45 points. The Republicans got destroyed by 34 points, and the progressives also lost 10% of their support. And so what I've done is I have gone into the poll results, and I have added that number to it. So instead of a 17% average, it's a 40% average. So you can assume that this 7%, this 10% loss will actually be applied to the 40% from the poll and not the 17% from real life. And so doing that to all of these parties, you end up with these results. 63% for the Dems, 7% for the Republicans, and 30% for the progressives. So the progressives actually get some land here, but the Dems still, of course, have that hold, but they have lost around 10%. And the Republicans have been thoroughly destroyed as well, but you still end up with a plus 33% safe. But this is Texas after all. But that's just how I've actually calculated this all out. I did this for every state, or almost all of them. There were some that just didn't need it, to be fair. But almost all of them I've done this to, and that's how I figured this out. So for this election, we're going to start actually, I think, this time on the West Coast, and we're going to sway east as we go. I'm going to do that just because West Coast or East Coast is more interesting, so I want to leave that till the end. And we'll start with safe states, and then we'll talk about our battlegrounds as we go. Alrighty, so now it is time to begin. Like I said earlier, we are going to go from west to east, and we're going to do it in blocks. We're going to do it first with the safe states, and then we'll go into a good bit more detail with the states that are closer. Then we'll do a characterization of the electoral votes at that period, and then we'll move on to the next region. But we're going to start out with this West Coast right here, and we're going to end right here. So Texas all the way through North Dakota. So this is going to be our big chunk, and first we're going to characterize the safe states. And I think very soon, very quickly, you're going to notice a pattern. So first of all, not doing this region and just focusing on this region, we have a safe state in Washington for the progressives. The same is true in Idaho, and the same is true in Nevada. Now in Nevada, what really boosts the progressives up is they're just overwhelming support in the actual in real life election. They got 36% of the vote. The Republicans only had 42%, so they actually got very close to winning the state in the actual election. And that 42% by the Republicans is a 12-point subtraction compared to their national average of 54, their percentage of 54 in the actual election. So that hurting of the Republican Party and the strengthening of the Progressive Party is leading to a 30-point victory in Nevada for the progressives. The progressives stand at 59% in the state, the Republicans at 29%, and the Democrats at just 12%. Now in Idaho, it is a very similar story, although the Democrats do even worse in Idaho than in Nevada. Now the progressives did good in real life already, 37 points. That is 20 points above their average in the entire country, which was 17%. So factoring that into the community poll, that leaves them with a 26% victory. Now out of the four corner states, there is only one safe state out of all of these four, and it is the state of Arizona. Arizona is the only safe state in the whole bunch, and it is, again, going to the progressives. That's another win for the progressives, a big win. And in Arizona, you're looking at an 18%. So you're seeing a boost in progressive support compared to the nation, plus 6 boost, and a very, very harsh decline for the Republicans in the state. They lost 13% compared to the national average. They only got 41% of the vote. And you're also seeing a strengthening of the Democrats. That's what makes this state safe at the end of the day. Now moving eastward, we have the state of Montana, the state of Wyoming, and the state of North Dakota and South Dakota. These are all safe states, again, for the progressives. We have 4 more wins for the progressives right here early on. These are very strong wins. We're looking at 31 points. We're looking at 20 points. And this is the same situation as other states, especially in the north. It's a lack of democratic fight. There's just not a lot of democratic support anywhere in these states. The Republicans just not being able to keep up with the progressive candidate. So without that democratic opposition and with a weak Republican Party compared to the progressives, especially considering the community poll, the progressives just destroy here, absolutely destroy. Now in the entire rest of this area, we're only looking at one more safe state, and that is the state of Texas. No surprise to anyone that knows American history, this state is not going anywhere, even with a massive uptick in progressive support. So believe it or not, that is all of the safe states for this side of the United States. And remember, looking back at the 1920 election, you can see just how shocking this is. These were all safe Republican states. And with your polling and with the charm of this progressive candidate, you're looking at safe states for a third party. You're looking at a state like this, which makes more sense. This is the likely state going safe. But you're also looking at states like Washington, like Oregon, these stronghold states being just wiped off the map. Sorry, we haven't talked about Oregon yet, but still, you get what I mean. It is this just pull from Wisconsin, which is where the progressive candidate is from. This pull just seeming to grab onto the north and seeming to just not let go. Now let us go for the likely states in this region. We're going to start in the west, and it's going to go first. Oregon is a likely progressive state. The progressives take Oregon as well, although not as strong of a victory in these states. It is still a victory, and the same can be said for California. But I am not done with progressive likely states. We have two more here. The first one is going to be Utah, the state of Utah. This four-corner state, again, not as strong as a victory compared to these states, but still a victory nonetheless. And lastly, the state of Nebraska. This state is being carried along by northern Nebraska. That really helped here. And now we're going to break apart these states. Now in California, this is all pretty obvious. It's just a massive, absolutely massive lack of Democrat support here. They only get 8% of the vote in real life, which just completely wipes them in this community poll, where they do even worse than they did in the real life election. And you're also seeing a massive outcome of support for the progressives. They do 16 points better than the national average at 33%. The Republicans at 44%, and the progressives at 56%, so a 12-point victory in California. Now in Oregon and Nebraska, it is a very similar story. It's just a lack of Democratic support here, and the progressives just taking advantage of that. Now the last likely states in this category is Kansas and Oklahoma. You might remember Oklahoma was a switch from 1920 to 1924. The Democrats were able to actually take it. In this universe, it is much the same. The Democrats are able to take this state, even with the hurt to their vote share. There is just a bigger hurt to the Republican share. Now for Kansas, this is where the progressives are stopped, finally stopped after this onslaught from the west and the northwest, just pushing into the nation. They are stopped here by the Republicans. The Republicans get Kansas as a likely state with an 11-point difference. Now these last two states, Colorado and New Mexico, are what we're going to call toss-ups. That means the results are much, much, much closer here. So we're going to get into that right now. This is really could be anyone's game. New Mexico is in danger to being taken by the Democrats here, just because of its position and the amount of Democratic support in the state being higher than some over here. And Colorado is in a very similar position when it comes to Republican support being taken over by progressive support. The progressives do quite well in Colorado. So we'll have to see if the Republicans can hold it. We're going to start out with New Mexico. Now, like I said before, what makes New Mexico dangerous is its Democratic vulnerability. Democrats are in this state. They are voting in numbers. And in real life, they got 43% of the vote, which is 14 points above the national average. You're looking at a 5-point malice for the Republicans. They only got 49% of the vote. But what really kills the progressives here is they're only getting 8% of the vote. That's 9 points below the national average, which is one of the worst showings we've seen so far, other than maybe Texas. So with all that being said, we're looking at, in the very end, Democrats at 33% of the vote, actually beating the progressives that had 31% of the vote, and the Republicans coming in at 36% of the vote. So the Republicans are able to clinch the state, hold off from the Democrats, completely beat the progressives, but only get the state at a 3% lean. Now for Colorado, it's even more contentious. In real life, you're looking at a 22% Democratic victory, so they're 7 points below the national average, and a victory of 57% of the vote for the Republicans, and only 20% of the vote for the progressives. Now, the thing that makes this difficult is that the Republicans did 3% better than the national average, and the progressives also got 3% better. Remember, they were at 17, now they're at 20. So they're tied in the boost for their support in this state, in the state of Colorado. Now, plugging all of this in, it is a very, very close contest, the closest contest of this race so far. We're looking at Democrats with 12% of the vote, progressives with 43% of the vote, and Republicans coming in at 44% of the vote. Republicans are able to clinch the state of Colorado, but are very, very closely trailed by the progressives, and this is a 1% tilt Republican state. So that is the western United States for the most part completely done. As you can see, there is a very strong progressive response in the north and in the west of the country, but that's starting to get beaten back by these safe states over here, these safe Republican states that we remember from 1920. These ones are being destroyed, but these ones are holding out. We'll have to see how they hold out as the night goes forward. But as you can see, they are able to just barely 1% hold over Colorado. That gives them 6 votes that I'm sure the progressives would have loved to have. And the fight with the Democrats also led to a Republican victory in the state of New Mexico, but again very slight, below 5 points here. But you end up with 64 electoral votes for the progressives, 19 electoral votes for the Republicans, and 30 electoral votes for the Democrats. You're looking at more progressive votes here than Republican and Democrat votes combined. I mean, it's insane to think about. If you remember, in the 1924 election, we end with just 13 votes. 13 votes for the Progressive Party, compared to now 64. That is the impact your community poll has had on this race. I'm very excited to see what happens in the east of the country. This is where stuff gets to be high stakes. This is where stuff will make or break this election. Make or break. Alrighty, so now the race continues, and we are moving east. We are moving south. We're moving to the southern voting bloc. Now, there's not too much to say here. This is the Democratic base for the most part. This is where they shine, and that could just be seen very easily with the results. We're, of course, going to mark the safe states first, and the safe states are all of these: Louisiana, right there, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina, Florida. This is our southern bracket. The only state that's not safe is Tennessee. This is a contentious state. This was won by the Republicans in 1920. It was a very, very slight win, one of the slimmest of the night, bar Kentucky. And in our historical 1924 election, the Democrats were able to win it back, but they did lose Kentucky. So I am interested to see what happens here. But if I do want to mention anything about the South right now, I will mention the weakest safe state and the strongest safe state. So the weakest safe state is actually going to be my home state of Florida. It's weird to see it with such little electoral votes. But Florida ended up with a 16-point margin. That's the weakest. Out of all of these states, a 16-point lead is the weakest for the Democrats, which is crazy to think about. In real life, it was 57% Democrat, 28% Republican, 6%, 8% Progressive, and 5% this Prohibitionist Party, which is very interesting. And afterwards, after our adjustment after the community poll, we end up with 47% Democrat, and Republicans at 15%, Progressives at 31%. So 16 points safe zone. And Republicans just blown out of the water, Progressives being second place, but still 16 points behind. Not a place you want to be. But compare that to South Carolina. In South Carolina, after adjusting our community poll, Democrats got 87% of the vote, which is crazy. If you remember, the community poll very much shifted up the results of the election. Of course, you can see that so far here. But it just did not affect South Carolina. It went from 97% for the Democrats to 87%. Still a big hit. The Republicans are really not even worth mentioning here. And the Progressives got 13% of the vote. So this is a plus 74-point victory for Democrats. The biggest of the night, for sure. Now here we go. Now we're talking about Tennessee, the only likely state of this entire block. Like I said before, in 1920 it was won by the Republicans, and in our historical 1924, the Democrats were able to take it back. So this is a likely state, and I'm happy to announce in this universe, Democrats held it as well. No crazy maneuvering here. This pact is as solid as ever. It becomes a likely Democrat state. Now, in real life, the Democrats got 53% of the vote here, which is a 24% increase based on their national average. So very strong victory in Tennessee. They did not like voting Republican last time. They really did regret their choice, it seems. And the Republicans did 10 points worse than average. They got 44%, and the progressives were barely even involved in this thing. But we end up with 43% Democrat support, Republicans at 30%, and progressives at 23%. Again, they rise so high because of how much they rose in our community poll. But still, it doesn't matter. They're cut down by the Democrats. Republicans second place at 30%, but still a 13-point hold, a 13-point victory for Democrats. They are able to flip the state of Tennessee. So with this block finished, the Democrats end up with 124 electoral votes, doubling their vote share over the progressives. There's a lot more green here, but there's a lot less electoral votes here. Look at these numbers: 20, 10, 12, two 12s right here, 14, 12. It's just a lot to take in. But the problem with the Democrats is, how are they going to get more support? The really only places that are vulnerable are these border states right here, maybe this state as well, and that's what they need to do if they really want to win this, especially in 1924. And then for the Republicans, they just need to hold strong here. They need to keep Ohio. Ohio is very important. They need to keep Illinois. They need to keep the entire Rust Belt pretty much. Now that is more vulnerable to progressives, so that is going to be definitely a danger zone. Next up, we are going to finish off the eastern coast and have that be its own section. Alright, so now we are moving on to the eastern coast. We are going to finish up this section, then we are going to finally strike at this Rust Belt area. Now, before we get into this, remember where we are at. In the 1920 election, it looked like this. Look how strong these states are. Look, almost all of these are safe states. And then look in the actual 1924 results, everything pretty much held. Maryland weakened. Other than that, I mean, really, there's not much here. Actually, you even see Delaware improve its status and get stronger. It's going to be very interesting to see how our poll changed this area. This area is, of course, very, very vital to the election. And we're going to start off from the very top. Now, the state of Maine. Again, we're starting with safe states. The state of Maine is going to be a safe Republican hold. It's not very surprising. The election rate was like 80% to 20% in real life, so stuff like this is just not going to change. With this duo right here, we are going to see Vermont hold as a safe state. We are going to see Connecticut and Rhode Island also stay safe. And lastly, the state of Delaware is going to move to a safe option, and so is New Jersey. That's it for this walk. Now, like I said before, this is 1920. This is our poll. This is the real 1924. Look how much this progressive movement has just destroyed the Republicans here. They are not taking that many votes from the Democrats. The progressives are destroying the Republicans. That's what this main fight is here. The Democrats are able to coast by, and maybe they'll be able to take some states back here and get even more on the hurt Republicans. But really, it is the Republicans that are fighting for their life here. Now, there is one more safe state in this batch. It is actually going to be a Democrat safe state, and that is going to be the state of Virginia right here. Don't forget the squiggly bit. Virginia is held, not very surprisingly. Virginia is actually more conservative here than North Carolina, interestingly enough. And so the percentages are even more out of whack there. Not too much of a surprise, and compare that with the results of 1920 and the results of 1924 in our timeline. You can see this Virginia is not going anywhere, not for the foreseeable future, and the same is true here. Now, as we move on to likely states, I'm going to talk about the ones that were closer, and I'm going to kind of ignore the ones that were farther apart and the very end of likely, because there's a lot of states here that were at the very tail end of this likely and closer to safe. Now, the first state that I'm going to put down is, unfortunately for progressives, going to be Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania would have been a very nice state to grab, but it is just the hardest to budge out of all of these. It sits at 15 points, a 15-point victory, which puts it very, very close to safe. And it puts the Democrats at 9%, the Republicans at 52%, and the progressives at 37%. In real life, the progressives got 14%, so that 3-point malice compared to the national average is what really does them in. And the Republicans doing so much better, 11 points above the average, just rise them to victory in the strongest out of all of these states. Now, next up is Massachusetts. That is also likely. It is a 13-point victory for the Republicans. It's a very similar story to Pennsylvania. Its 18 electoral votes would have been very nice for the progressives, but it does not look like it's happening this election. New Hampshire is a very similar story with a 12-point lead. And this last state in the bunch here, New York, is just ultra important for any side that wants to win. In real life, it went like this: 29% for the Dems, actually a very surprising amount for so far north. 56% for the Republicans, and 15% for the progressives. So we're looking at a malus of 2 for the progressives, a bonus of 2 for the Republicans, and an actual on average amount for the Dems. 29% is the same as the national average. So when you plug all that into the community poll results, that puts the Dems at 19%, the progressives at 38%, and the Republicans at 43%, making this a +5 state for the Republicans, at the very cusp of being a lean state, but nonetheless, this is going to be a Republican state. Now, this is very disheartening for progressives for, I think, reasons that make a lot of sense, but, I mean, just look at this compared to the actual results. Look at that. Look at that difference. Look at the weakening of the Republican Party here. That has to be something in and of itself. That has to be an accomplishment. I certainly think so. But yeah, that is very impressive. The only real hope the progressives have now comes into this area. Now, they have a guaranteed victory with Wisconsin. That much is known. But if they can take these states, that is the real question. If they do, that might very much help. But now we're on to the last state of this bunch, and that is the state of Maryland. Now, Maryland only has 3 electoral votes, but it is in the lean column. Now, what makes Maryland so interesting is just its position in the United States and who's actually fighting here. It is not like a lot of these other states where it's progressives versus Republicans. It is Democrats versus Republicans here. In real life, the Republicans got 45% of the vote. The Democrats got 41% of the vote. They were trailing them by only 4 points. That's +12 for the Democrats on the national average, and a -9 for the Republicans. Now, for the progressives, it's a -4. They got 13% of the vote, but still a nice bonus. And considering just how much the Democrats and Republicans are fighting here, how close they are, and how much the Republicans have lost compared to the national average, this is a very, very interesting race. And here's how it turns out. In the very end, you have Democrats with 31% of the vote, Republicans with 32% of the vote, and progressives actually with 36% of the vote. A 4-point lean victory for the progressives in an area surrounded by Democrats and Republicans. Now, this, of course, is a very interesting victory for progressives. It is a slap in the face for Republicans, and if we look at the actual results, you can see they were able to hold it, so this is definitely showing their loss. It makes sense as this was the weakest state in 1924, but as you can see, it was quite strong just 4 years earlier, 1920. So it is quite impressive to see a progressive victory here. It really just shows how much you guys have changed history here with this poll, and it may just be a precursor of what's going to happen here. It might be a hint at a possible progressive victory in this block. But anyway, that concludes this block. Let's put the vote results on screen. So with this block finished up, the entire eastern coast of the United States filled, we end up with 67 electoral votes for the progressives, 136 electoral votes thanks to Virginia for the Democrats, and 163 electoral votes for the Republicans. If you remember, they were at 19 before. This is a massive block, a massive victory. And although they were shaken by the progressives in a lot of these areas, coming very close in New York, actually taking them in Maryland, it just was not enough to stop this steamroll. But again, it is just very impressive considering the change here from real life 1924 to our timeline of 1924, where again, in the end, they won 382 electoral votes. That's the end of this. Now it is time for our last block, our most contentious block, our most nerve-wracking block. This is going to determine the winner of this election. All right, now we're on to our last block, one of our biggest blocks in vote share, and a very pivotal one for all parties. We're going to start, of course, with safe states, and bad news for people who are anxious, there are only 3 safe states in this entire block. We have, first of all, Michigan. Michigan holds as a safe state for Republicans, and this is just mostly because the Democrats just have nothing here. In the very end, Democrats end up with 3% of the vote, progressives with 34% of the vote, and Republicans with 61% of the vote. This is a +27 safe state. Now, the other two safe states are for the Progressive Party. We have Minnesota and Wisconsin. Now, Wisconsin we already knew. You can look at the 1924 election and see that this is a safe state. You knew it was going to be like this in this election too. But there is the flipping of Minnesota, and not only the flipping, but also the turning into a safe state. Wisconsin is, of course, the home of the progressive candidate himself. This is where he resides. This is where he has the most popularity, and his victory here is the biggest of his night. And with Minnesota, there's just no Democrats there, and the progressives are just doing incredibly well there. They end up with 64% of the vote, so a 26-point victory. The Republicans at 38% of the vote. It is just a slam dunk. But that is all we have for safe states for this block. Everything else is more contentious. Alright, the next big pickup for the Republicans is going to be Indiana. This was a big one for the progressives, but they just couldn't squeak it out this time. But it makes sense again when you look at the maps of just everything. Look at 1920, and then it solidifies 1924. Same is true here. It is a little bit better. It does reverse this solidification right here. Now we're back to 1920, but it is okay. In the end, in Indiana, the Dems got 29% of the vote, the Republicans got 42%, and the Progressives actually tied with 29%. So that's a plus 13 there. And then the next likely state is going to be Illinois. Now, Illinois did experience a small loss in Democrat support compared to the national average. It's -6. The Republicans got a +5 compared to the national average at 59%, and the Progressives actually got the national average of 17%. Now, the Republicans holding up like this does mean that this is going to be a Republican likely state, and we are looking at a +12 here, so a little bit less than Indiana, interestingly enough, but still an unfortunate blow for the Progressives. The Republicans are going to love that pickup. It will help a lot in the vote share. Now, the next state is going to be Iowa. Iowa is also going to be a likely state. In real life, the Dems had 16%, so a -13 compared to the national average. Quite a poor response, but that makes sense considering Iowa's position on the map here. Republicans got a 55%, so just 1 point above the national average, and Progressives got a 28%, so 11 points above the national average. And calculating all this together, the Dems end up with a measly 6%, the Republicans get a 42%, and the Progressives get a 51%, meaning that this is a progressive grab, a likely state, and the extra 13 electoral votes, very nice. And we're looking at a +9 here. It's not nearly as good as these states, but it is something, and it is going to help with, like I said before, their count of states in general, because count of states also matters in a situation where no one gets to 266. The amount of states that you hold and control is going to be kind of what decides the election here. This is, however, all that we have for likely states. Everything else is even less than that. So now we're going to move on to lean states. That's anything less than 5 points. Now, in this block, 3 of these states are actually lean states, which means that we have one final tilt, less than 1 point win for one of these states. That's going to be very exciting, but there are 3 leans. The first one we're going to go over is Missouri. Missouri has a lot of electoral votes here, and they're in a pretty unique position in terms of where they are in the United States and their makeup. Now, in real life, the Dems got 44% here, which is a huge amount, +15 compared to the national average, so they did very well here, as is true with a lot of these border states here. That's what makes them also contentious. The Republicans got about 50%, which is -4 compared to the national average, which would be very good for progressives, except progressives in real life only got 6%, -11, which really destroys their chance for a victory here. Afterwards, all in all, the Dems end up with 34%, the progressives end up with 29%, and the Republicans end up with 37%, meaning that this is another Republican pickup with only 3 points to spare. +3 here. Very close, but this goes to the Republicans, again inflating their already big score and hurting the Democrats and the progressives, but mainly the Democrats, who could have got a really nice hold here. Okay, and now we're on to the next lean state, and I actually stand corrected here. There is only 2 lean states, so 2 of these remaining states are going to be decided by less than a point. Everything else, the other one out of the three is going to be a lean state, and that one is going to be Ohio. Now, Ohio is very important. It's a beautiful pickup for progressives. There's a lot going on in the state's demographics, and overall it's very important to the election. Most presidents don't get elected without Ohio, at least back then. Now, in real life in Ohio, the Dems fared quite well for a northern state with 24%, so they lost 5 overall compared to the national average. Republicans outperformed only by 4 points and ended up with 58%. Now, progressives ended up with 18%, which is an overperformance compared to the national percentage. Remember that being 17%. This becomes super close, especially you're just considering how the community poll went. But overall for this state, you end up with, in last place, Dems with 14% of the vote, progressives with 41% of the vote, and Republicans with 45% of the vote. This is another Republican grab, and really just solidifies where this election is going. It seems to be going for Coolidge, just with a much smaller majority, and really just an election that proves that third-party candidates can succeed in this environment. Now, next state we're going to cover is the state of Kentucky. In the state of Kentucky, in real life, Dems ended up with 46% of the vote, 17 points above the national average. This was a huge state for Democrats. If you remember, in 1920, they were able to grab the state by the slimmest of margins. In 1924, in our timeline, they did lose it again to a slim margin, but this is a battleground state. This is a state that people fight over, and the same is true of this election. 46% for the Dems. 49% for the Republicans. They were able to grab it by just 3 points. And progressives at a staggering 5%. I mean, they just were not a part of this election, at least in this state, unfortunately for you guys that are rooting for the progressives. Now, after doing the changes that the community poll have made, we're left with 28% for the progressives, 36% for Republicans, and 36% for the Democrats. That's right, the same percentage. It was within a point. It was within a point, but I do have to say that based on just a decimal behind the number, the Democrats end up grabbing Kentucky, taking it back from how they kept it in 1920. They're keeping it in this election. Not like in our timeline where they lost it. In this election, they are keeping it, and that just goes to show that the real people that were being attacked here were not the Democrats. They were always solid where they were. It was the Republicans. The Republicans were the ones under attack. They're the ones who have just been destroyed. I mean, look at the difference between this election and the in real life election. It's just staggering. The Republicans were the victims here, but will they be the ones to succeed? It really does seem like it. We have one more state left. It is another within 1 point state, and here's how it breaks down. So in West Virginia, in real life, let's look at the context. In 1920, it was a pretty solid Republican hold. In 1924, it was the same. It was a likely Republican state. Now, with all of the problems, all of the challenges that have gone on during this election, all the differences compared to the 1924 election of our timeline, this state does become a surprising battleground. Now, in real life, the Dems had 44% of the vote, another huge overperformance compared to the country's average. The Republicans had 49%, which really is a loss. 49% is a 6-point malice compared to their national average, which means they underperformed here. But the biggest loser of all is the progressives. Again, they only have 6% in this state, minus 11 compared to the national average. Again, they're not a player. It's very unfortunate. They could have gotten a couple nice pickups here. But overall, it comes out like this. Progressives come out of this election with 29% of the vote. Democrats come out of this election with 34% of the vote. And Republicans come out of this election with 35% of the vote. A very, very, very minor, very close victory for the Republicans, actually, in the state of West Virginia. As you can see, they are able to hold it just like they did in 1920 and just like they did in real life, even though it's just so much closer this time. And it's really interesting because the Dems, again, outperformed by 15 points. The Republicans failed by 6 points. But even then, they were able to make up the difference just by 1 percentage point. So thank you for making it to the end of this video. If you've made it all the way, that's really awesome. This was super fun to make, super difficult to make compared to my other videos, but just such a blast. Everything is set up now. This map is complete. It looks beautiful. I have the vote counts. I have everything ready. As you can see, third place, we have 110 electoral votes for the Progressive Party. Insane numbers for a third-party candidate in the United States. This would be record-breaking at the time and probably change the future elections forever, which is just an awesome achievement. You guys are awesome. In second place is 149 electoral votes. The Democrats were able to pick up the state of Kentucky. And just so you know, the Progressives were able to pick up 15 states. Just amazing. The Republicans picked up 0. They only lost states. But even still, they got 272 electoral votes, and it's just insane. This is the difference between 41% of the vote and 40% of the electoral vote. Well, 40.1. This is what 0.9% does to you. 110 to 272. Imagine if 0.9 more voted for this. It's just really interesting to have a close election like this. They're really beautiful maps when they end up like that. And this has just been fascinating. I'm really excited to get into 1928. Hopefully this video does well, but this is the kind of video that even if it doesn't, I would just make over and over again, because this was just such a blast. It was so fun dealing with this new system. It was so fun just going through everything, acting all professional, being able to paint a map like this. So again, just for context, here we have 1920. Let's just pretend this is our reality of 1920, and then this was 4 years later for us. Boom. From this to this. From this to this. It's insane. If you want to be a little bit more delicate with it, we can just switch from 1924. This is our timeline, and this is what you guys did. Our timeline, what you guys did. Our timeline, what you guys did. This is so cool. I'm really excited to see what you guys do next. If you do want to vote in the next ones, the link is still going to be in the comments in the description. If you are still interested, sure, go ahead, make your vote heard. Just know that your vote won't count towards this one because this has already been uploaded, of course. But 1928 and beyond is all fair game. But I hope you liked this. Let me know what I can do different. If you liked everything, please make sure to like and subscribe. This took a while, so I'd really appreciate it. And that is about it. See ya.